Live now. Let me just check here one moment. Let's see. Okay, looks like it should be working. Well, welcome, Swamiji. Thank you for taking this time with us. I want to briefly introduce you before we start talking. This is the first time we've hosted you, so I'm sure that there are some folks that have yet to meet you. Swami Saradananda has been teaching yoga for over 40 years, practicing even longer than that, and working with the Shivananda yoga centers for many years, but has been teaching independently for the last several years. She's based in London, teaches yoga and meditation worldwide. In addition to teaching, she's the author of a number of books, including Sitting Comfortably, which we are going to be talking about today. And she is a great lover of India, and leads frequent pilgrimages there. She holds a master's in traditions of yoga and meditation. And most importantly, she shares the teachings and practices of yoga in a way that makes people want to practice. Swami, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I wondered if you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, specifically, where are you from?
Well, I'm from New York originally. Maybe you can hear from my accent.
Yeah.
I know a lot of times people say, oh, I'm in London, and then I start speaking and they're shocked. I've lived in London for about 30 years now, but I haven't lost my accent yet. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I worked with the Shivananda Yoga Centers, and for the past, I would say 20 years, I call myself a freelance yogi.
That's a good title.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what else to tell you.
Well, how did you end up in London?
Well, as you may know, the Shivananda organization is an international organization. So they sent me here to run the London branch, which I did for about 12 years. And then after I left there, I went to India for a year and I just did my personal practice. And then I lived in Massachusetts for a year. Then I lived in Germany for about a year and a half. And then I just ended up back in London. Yeah.
And how was it that you came to yoga and meditation? Was that in New York that you first experienced yoga and meditation?
Yeah, I was actually living in Florida. And I was looking for some kind of physical exercise. Mm-hmm. And I saw an ad for a yoga class. It used to be in the park in Florida because, the weather's so nice there.
Yeah.
And I thought, I had no idea what it was. But I thought, well, I might as well try this. And I found that it really made me feel very good. Mm-hmm. Because I had a problem. I was very sick as a child. I had polio.
Oh, wow.
And I was actually paralyzed for about a year. I think I was about 4 years old. And the doctors told my parents I'd never be able to walk. And my mother used to say the reason I could walk was that I was too young to understand the doctors. So
it's probably true.
I just kept trying until I could walk. But then all through school, I never had to do any kind of gym. My mother was afraid I'd hurt myself, so she'd always write a note to get me out. Mm. And then when I actually started college, they wouldn't take my mother's note. So I had to do gym, and I found that I just felt so much better by doing exercise. And then when I finished, I was looking, for some kind of exercise, and that's how I happened on yoga. And I practiced very intensively. I lived in Florida for a couple of years, and then I moved back to New York, and I started going to the center regularly. Like every day I was practicing, and I actually started to work with the Shivananda organization. I think I worked with them for about 26 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in that first yoga class, I know even today, there's many yoga centers, yoga studios that don't emphasize the spiritual side or the meditative side of yoga. Did you get that from your first teacher, or did that come from within, that you realized that you're calmer or more peaceful? How did you make that leap from exercise science to meditation?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, I think I just did the asanas, I did the pranayama. I remember I got my teacher, Swami Devananda, I got his book. There weren't very many books of yoga in those days. And I remember there was this strange word that I'd never seen before, which was vegetarian. I didn't know a vegetarian. I didn't even have the concept that it was possible. But then I thought, wow, yeah, that's a good idea. And I became a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started like practicing on a regular basis. And I think my first teachers, they emphasized the asanas and pranayama.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I moved back to New York and I started to go to the Shivananda Center there, and they would have regular satsangs and meditation, and I went to their ashram in Canada, and I just started getting more and more interested
Mm-hmm.
in the meditation and the spiritual aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like most people who start yoga, they start with the physical. Well, most Westerners
Right.
start with the physical,
Mm-hmm.
and then if they're lucky, they get introduced to something more.
For sure. Well, you mentioned this might be a no-brainer to a lot of people, but there might be other people that, when you mentioned the word vegetarianism, that they might not have that connection. I know we were talking earlier that you've met meditators, daily meditators, who still smoke and drink and eat meat. And what are those? What's the importance, I'll say, of having a vegetarian diet, or like those other things? What does that do for your body to prepare for meditation?
Um, well, of course, it makes you much more flexible. It makes the body, it purifies the body a lot more. But I think I actually became a vegetarian more because of the aspect of ahimsa,
Mm.
or nonviolence. Because if I thought I'm going to be practicing yoga, which is so in favor of nonviolence, how can I be hurting other beings? And I
Mm-hmm.
actually had an experience. I think this is what really made me a vegetarian. Is I was living in Florida, and then I went back to New York to see my family. And I think, like any place in the world, when you go to visit your family, your mother makes your favorite food. So I used to like to eat lobster a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because I lived in New York, which has really good lobster. And my mother she actually went out and bought the lobster from the fishermen. And she came home and they were swimming around in our bathtub. And then she boiled up a pot of water, which is how you cook lobster, and then you drop them in live. And I actually heard them screaming. And it made me realize that I don't need lobster. I mean, my tongue likes the taste, but I
Mm-hmm.
actually don't need it to live. But yet, because my tongue, just to give my tongue a little pleasure, I'm
Mm-hmm.
causing this terrible suffering to other beings.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that realization and knowing that it was possible to be vegetarian, I never ate meat or fish again after that.
Mm. Yeah, it's one of those experiences that you can't turn your back from, right? Kind of
Mhm.
the door opens and you can't close it again.
Right.
Well, speaking of, meditation and yoga is supposed to be, people practice it to experience inner peace, right? They practice it to have a peaceful experience, and so we can't really separate. I guess we can't really separate that practice that's on the mat or on the cushion from the rest of our daily lives. Talking a little bit about your book that's coming out on June 8th. It's called Sitting Comfortably. Let me make sure I get the subtitle here. Preparing the Mind and Body for Peaceful Meditation. It
Mhm.
comes out on June 8th. And
Right.
we're actually going to be doing it. Oh, you got the cover there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So we're actually going to be doing an event with Swami Saradananda next month. We'll have details about that just in the next week here, and we'll put it into the description if you're watching this later on. But speaking about the book a little bit, what was your inspiration on writing this book that focuses on the physicality of meditation?
Well, for the past, I think it's about 15, 16 years now, I've been teaching a course for yoga teachers who want to teach meditation.
Hmm.
And over the years, I've sort of compiled questions people ask and, how to answer it and problems people have. So that it's a course for yoga. People have to be yoga teachers to do the course. And they do practice teaching, and then they report like questions their students ask, problems the students have. And I've been sort of compiling it over the years, so the book is really based on that course,
Hmm.
and problems that I found that people have with meditation. And I found that the one reason people who think they want to meditate actually don't do it is because it's just too uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I think it's natural not to really want to, anything that's not comfortable, we sort of procrastinate and we put off. So, how to make it a more, maybe not pleasurable experience, but at least a comfortable experience.
Mhm.
And I wanted to call the book Prepare to Meditate, but the publisher didn't like that title. So then I said it has to have, the title actually comes from that verse in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, asana sukham stiram sukham. When you sit for meditation, your pose should be comfortable and steady.
Mm.
So that's where we got the title, Sitting Comfortably.
Wow, that's neat that it's such an ancient root to the title.
Hmm.
We were talking a little bit beforehand. Um, I was sharing information, my experience of teaching yoga and meditation classes at Ananda, where for some of these courses, we actually had people who weren't really interested so much in learning about our yoga philosophy, but they were Buddhists who didn't have any resources in their own sangha for working with the body as holistically as yoga does. And so they actually approached yoga uh, from a whole different school of meditation, because yoga has its own meditation practices. But can you mention a little bit about how this book um, and about how these techniques can benefit people who are not yogis?
Yeah, well, nowadays people do so many different types of meditation. And the idea behind the book was to be sort of non sectarian, non denominational. So it
Mm-hmm.
actually doesn't have any meditation techniques in it, but it only has techniques as how to get ready to meditate so that whatever practice you want to do, you can actually physically do it. Your mind and also your not just your body, but your mind is ready to do it.
Mm-hmm.
As I was mentioning to you before we started recording, is a lot of people come to class and they say, "Oh, I don't think I can meditate. My mind is so jumpy." And then you say to them, "Well, how many cups of coffee do you drink?" And they don't put it together. 10 cups of coffee a day. I wonder why
Yeah,
my mind is jumpy.
yeah, totally.
Hmm.
And one of the classic images, I think, that both inspires people but also discourages them at the same time. I mean, if you go on Google right now and you type in meditation, you're going to see all of these, um, fit young people on the beach or whatever, sitting cross-legged, right?
Hmm.
And actually, I find it hard though to find an image of somebody who's sitting with their knees below their hips. So they're sitting cross-legged, but they're not even really sitting how one is supposed to sit. So it's interesting. You see these images where you see the serenity of the practice, but then they're not really showing you kind of how to do it. How important is it to sit in that way, to sit cross-legged or to sit on the floor in particular?
Yeah, I don't think it's important to sit on the ground, but you shouldn't sit on something soft.
Hmm.
Because if you sit on a couch or a bed, your back is going to round.
Mhm.
But I think if you're practicing yoga, then if you're practicing a yoga technique, it is important to sit cross legged because in a yoga technique, we practice pratyahara, means that we try to draw the senses in. So it's important to bring your body, to physically bring your body into a position that contains the energy. I mean, if you're sitting with your legs stretched out, obviously your energy is going outward,
Mm.
and it makes pratyahara more difficult. So I think if you're practicing a yoga technique, it is important to sit cross-legged. If you're practicing a Buddhist technique, it's less important.
Mm.
In Buddhist techniques, they don't have pratyahara.
Mm.
So Buddhist techniques will be kneeling or sitting in a chair. So I think how you sit depends also on what technique you're using. So I give the different positions for sitting, but I think the most important thing for any technique is to have your back straight.
Mhm.
If you're sitting cross-legged but your knees are above your hips, it's actually physically impossible to have your back straight,
Wow.
because as soon as the knees go up, the lower back will round. So however you're sitting, it's important to have the back straight.
Hmm. Hmm. And that's for the energy, for an energetic purpose, or also why is the back straightness so important?
Well, it's important energetically, but it's also important for breathing.
Hmm.
You know, if you're sitting with your back rounded, your chest is going to be caving in and you can't breathe properly. So
Hmm.
then when you sit for meditation, you're going to tend to fall asleep.
Hmm.
So I think in order to breathe properly and to have the energy move up the spine, it's very important to have the back straight.
Hmm.
A lot of people either can't sit on the floor or they just don't want to sit on the floor. So, in that case, they can sit in a chair as long as it's a straight chair. It's not a couch or some
Lazy boy.
chair. Yeah. Um, but then the back should be straight and not to lean back against the back of the chair, because you'll tend to sort of slouch if you lean back.
Hmm.
So even if you're sitting on a straight chair, I advise people to come slightly away from the back.
Hmm.
And again, even if you're sitting in a chair, make sure your knees are just slightly lower than your hips.
Hmm. Okay.
Sometimes people are, they're sitting on quite a low chair and the knees are too high, in which case you could just put a blanket or a cushion, sit on the chair and
Hmm.
sit up a bit.
And so does the book talk about some props and different things like that?
Yes.
Okay, good. One thing I know, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people like me. I find sometimes that uh, in trying to keep my spine straight, I feel pain in my lower back. Um, do you have, does the book talk about back pain in meditation?
Yes. Hmm. Yeah,
Good.
there's a whole section, because probably the reason you feel the back pain is that you tend not to sit straight most of the time, like most modern
Hmm.
people. We sit in chairs, we sit at computers. Even if you're a good yogi and you do your asanas for a day, the rest of the day you're sitting like this over the computer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, whenever the body comes into a position, certain muscles will become weak, other muscles will become overly strong.
Hmm.
So, in order to sit straight, you have to be flexible, but the correct muscles have to be strong as well to support you.
Right.
Yeah. So there are different exercises you can do to to develop that.
Hmm. And one other thing that I wanted to ask about is just simply uh, the role that stillness plays in meditation. Is the goal to be able to be perfectly still, and if so, what benefit do you get from having a completely still body?
Well, the idea, the I would say meditation is the experience you have when your mind is still.
Hmm.
Now, your body doesn't move unless your mind moves it.
Hmm.
So, if you're moving your body, your mind can't be still. So, I think it is important to sit as still as possible.
Hmm.
We do have what people generally call walking meditation, but I think a better term would be meditative walking.
Mm, right.
And yeah, sometimes I lead retreats and people want to sit long periods, but yet they haven't been sitting the rest of the time, or, their bodies just aren't up to it.
Mhm.
So, what I often do is I have them sit for 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we walk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we sit for another 20 minutes or half an hour, and then we walk a bit more. And that way, people can sit for several hours at a time.
Mm,
Even Westerners who are used to sitting in chairs.
mm,
So, I think meditative walking is a good thing, but in itself, it's not completely meditation.
right. Right. Yeah. I think that's one of the things, misconceptions that I've seen, working in a spiritual bookstore is people will say, well, I meditate lying down, or I meditate when I'm surfing, and I think you're right. It's more accurate to say that there are ways that you can do those things meditatively, but they're not necessarily uh, a, a, um, a rep, what's the word, to replace meditation itself for classical meditation.
Right, right. And I think anytime people lie down, they tend to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I tell people never lie down for meditation.
Yeah. It's never worked for me. Well, one of the other things I wanted to mention is some of the other books that you've written. You've covered the practice of mudras, and initially your chakra book. We've carried that for many years, and also the breath. And you said something just now that that I hadn't actually considered. You said that the body doesn't move unless the mind tells it to, and that there's an interplay between the movement of thoughts and the movement of the body. Where does the breath, and then where do mudras come into play?
Um, well, I think mudras are, we have prana in the body.
Mhm.
Prana is prana is moving through channels that yogis call nadis, or acupuncturists call meridians. So, in Chinese traditional medicine, most of the major meridians either start or finish in the hands or feet.
Mm,
You see, so it's like wiring. If you join these two wires together, you're going to get a different effect than joining these wires together. So, what is it you want to achieve? You can use different mudras to achieve those purposes. It's like you channel the energy into different directions.
mm,
It's like moving the tracks of the train. You can move it in whatever direction you want the train to go in.
mhm.
So, whatever direction you want your prana to move in, one way is by using mudras. And the word literally means seal, like you would seal an envelope, or you would seal out the noise. You seal your windows in the winter.
Mhm.
So we're sealing the energy into different channels. Mhm. So for meditation, people use different mudras, but nowadays, mudras are used more and more in healing as well.
Mm.
A lot of kinesiologists are using it. A lot of chiropractors are using mudras.
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course, in yoga tradition, we use them together with asanas.
And then pranayama, is that kind of a similar practice that controls the energy in the body?
Yeah, yeah. The word pranayama actually means control of the prana, or making the prana longer, extending it.
Mm.
See, so the whole process of hatha yoga, and actually the term hatha yoga nowadays, for most people, they think it means the easy yoga you do in the health club if you don't want to do Ashtanga yoga. But actually, it means any kind of physical practice.
Mm.
Um, and you're really working with the prana. If you think about it, every asana you do, every position you put your body in, you're putting pressure on different points. And one of the purpose of asanas is to break up blockages in the prana.
Mhm.
See, and then we want to start to purify, strengthen the nadis, and eventually in hatha yoga, We want to bring the prana into the main channel, which yogis call sushumna.
Mhm.
Right? And then we want to bring it up through the various levels. So, of course, if you're working with prana, if you say to most people, control your prana, they're going to say to you, well, okay, where is it? What is it? You know,
Yeah.
most people don't feel the prana moving in their body.
Yeah.
So start with the physical body, by moving the physical body, putting it in different directions, and you're going to affect the prana.
Mm.
Okay. Also, we say the outward manifestation of the prana is the breath. So if you can't work with the prana because you don't experience it, start by controlling your breath. And by controlling your breath, you'll control your mind and you'll eventually control your prana.
Mm.
So they all work together.
Well, those are explanations you don't hear at your normal, YMCA yoga class. Well, thank you, Swamiji, for taking this time to share. And like I mentioned, I think we've set the date as being June 26th. It'll be at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So for those of you on the East Coast, we're going to do this event. What would that be? 1 p.m. Eastern time, and then as Swamiji was saying, she's coming from London, so that would be 6 p.m. London time.
Yes.
So if we have anybody in that time zone, what our hope is for this event is that she'll cover sitting comfortably, but also dive into some of these teachings to awaken the prana in the body, and specifically to use these towards meditation. And like I said, we'll put the link to spend this time with Swami Saradananda, this meditation workshop, in the link. The link will be in the description to these videos wherever you're watching them. And we'll also add a link where you can purchase her books as well through our bookshop.org page. And we really appreciate you shopping independently and locally through there and supporting amazing authors like Swami Saradananda. Swamiji, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and looking forward to hosting you next month.
Okay, thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.